Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you let us know where we got it right and where we completely missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com or any one of our social channels like Rumble. So let's get into it. So I proposed a topic today, Brian, and that is what is it about our society today, and what can Kenny G learn from the fact that we can't even agree on the basic facts that we should be discussing? On both sides of the political divide, you've got people that are so far apart that we can't even say this is an actual truth. It's an actual fact. That wasn't always the case, was it?
No. Well, my first answer is no, but then I'm becoming somewhat honestly like skeptical and cynical and whatever, and I'm beginning to wonder. I kind of keep pegging the time where I notice things changing pretty significantly is around
Sure.
2000, 2008, somewhere in that span.
Sure. Yeah.
And becoming I remember like slowly becoming aware, that seems like not quite right, but whatever, politicians lie and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But the more skeptical and cynical I get, the more I wonder how much I was duped before I became aware that I was being duped. So I don't know. I it's a well-known fact that politicians lie.
Sure.
They say what they have to say to stay in power, because if they're not in power, like nothing else matters to them, right? Like they can't, even if they're really good politicians, like they can't fix anything if they're not in power. So step 1A is I got to remain in power, so therefore I must say what I have to say to get the most votes. So I think I can kind of wrap my head around that. I think that the part that is the most shocking for me, that I don't know if will ever be able to articulate to my own grandkids or great grandkids or to Kenny G on this podcast, is the massive change in how I view media and how many people I know view the news media. Like if Tom Brokaw said a thing, like I believed it, and I think deep down we all kind of know, okay, well, you're going to put your own kind of personal spin on it. Actually, no, now I think about it, it was when Dan Rather said the thing that completely was proven to be completely untrue. I don't remember. It was something with George W. Bush, I think. I don't remember the details.
Bush, yeah.
That was about the time. So whatever era that was probably 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. I don't know. That was kind of where it kind of hit me over the head. Like, wait a second. These guys I kind of relied on my whole life to tell me the truth. Like, they're not telling the truth. And is that new? Is it not new? So, it's kind of a long opening monologue, but it's frustrating. It's exhausting. It's tiring. It's just maddening. It feels we're crippled and hamstrung. If we can't agree on basic facts, we can't solve anything. So nothing else is going to matter.
We trusted, so back to Tom Brokaw, or you remember David Brinkley and Huntley Brinkley and all those news people and all of the politicians. In the old days, we might have disagreed with the politician of the opposite party, but we did, and we might have disagreed on their conclusion about, we might have disagreed about their conclusion or about what their plan is. Well, I'm going to do this. Well, we know they're not going to do that. That's a lie. But we didn't necessarily disagree on the basic facts that they presented to us. I think that's one of the differences that we have now, because we depend on the elites, we depend on the news people to sort of suss out, to go out and to find the relevant facts, report them back to us, and then we can make a decision on what we believe about those facts. It's Fox News used to say, "We report, you decide." It's sort of telling that now they just say America's listening. They don't do that anymore.
Right.
Nobody does that. So the real challenge I think we have in our society is you have different sides that will either choose or ignore to report certain things, to report certain facts, and a half-truth is worse in reality, I think, than no truth, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have complete truth, you have no truth.
Yeah, I think I think part of what I've been trying to sort out is, like I'll go back to this Solzhenitsyn quote. And for those who don't know, he wrote a lot about. He wrote the Gulag Archipelagos. Is that right? He's that guy, isn't he? That guy?
Yeah, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Yeah, and he was a Soviet dissident.
Right. So one of his quotes is, "We know they are lying. They know they are lying. They know we know they are lying. We know they know we know they are lying, but they're still lying."
But they're still
And the point is, like, everyone knows they're full of shit, but they're still doing it, and we still have to pretend like we're going along. Now, what he's referring to, if I understand it correctly, and you of course tell me if I'm wrong, he's talking about the government, like the bureaucracies, right?
Yes.
Not the representatives. So they have what they call the Duma. Is that what they have? That's
the Russian Duma. Yes.
Their version of the parliament or whatever.
Right.
So we have representatives who are supposed to go represent us and direct the government.
Yes.
And those representatives would lie to get elected. I think that one of the major things, the media not telling the truth now anymore, but the bureaucrats flat out just saying things that we can see with our own eyes are not true. So, for example, Mayorkas recently, over the last few years, repeatedly in front of Congress saying the border's closed. We have a secure border. I think were his words, and I may be misquoting a little bit, but essentially, like, the border's closed is what he's saying. Meanwhile, there's hundreds or thousands of hours of B-roll just of people just like
streaming
swarming
across
the border, right? And so that is a completely different world than we were in 25 years ago.
This is essentially, to go back to 1984, reworking reality to fit the party's perspective at the time. That's what that's what Solzhenitsyn, grew up and was living under, was the Soviet propaganda and the Soviet presentation of the world. That's what North Korea right now, what you see on the inundation of the North Koreans, to the extent that we know about it, because it's a hermit kingdom, is they're told that they're the greatest society in the world, and that their leader is powerful, and that they're, all these things. But the reality around them that they see is something different. But the presented reality is completely different, and appealing to the emotional, sort of buy-in that people have to believe that reality isn't what they see in front of them, and the politicians manipulate that. That's what the Soviets did, and we like to think that, I like to think that I'm pretty connected to actual physical reality. I mean, we like to think that we're connected to that. And so it's hard then sometimes to believe that people could deny so much of what is so obvious to you and I. And that's what I think is, to a great degree, so distressing about today, and not even considering the actual physical reality on the ground that affects our lives.
Yeah. Well, I think that if we put ourselves, just like take ourselves away from like thinking about government, things like that, and just like the lives we live,
sure,
especially like in our earlier, in our let's just say, picture your average 25-year-old. How many, and let's say this 25-year-old is married with a child, how many lies a day does that 25-year-old tell to the spouse or the child just in the run-of-the-mill day?
Right.
Now, they're not all malicious. You might tell your kid that the dog went to a farm instead of got hit by a car.
Sure.
You might lie to your spouse about something you're really embarrassed you did. You might, so I think that part of it is we expect them to be different than, and we forget they're human.
Yeah.
So Mayorkas sitting there saying, no, the border's closed. Of course it's closed. What do you mean? We have a secure border. Well, it's no different than the 25-year-old lying to their family because of whatever reasons. It's either, if he acknowledges this, he's going to look stupid or incompetent or foolish, or he believes there's a higher value in deception because the thing he values more is more important than the truth here. It's no different than telling your kid that it's no different than telling your kid that the dog went to the farm. It's
but that's
this
it.
other
That's
thing I
exactly it.
want is more important than the truth today, and that's 100% what's going on, I think.
That is exactly it. That's 100% it. I mean, if you take a look at, for instance, telling your kid that the dog went, the kid's not old enough to understand,
Yeah.
And you kind of get into, the nature of lies, right? Is there such a thing as a little white lie? That gets all philosophical. But if you think about the things that we're talking about today, they're so far extremely beyond little white lies, right? I mean,
Right.
people streaming across the border at the same time. No, the border's secure. So this
Yeah.
is a big, herkin, monstrous deception or attempt to
Yeah.
deceive, even in the face of undeniable reality. And it's only because of the last thing you mentioned. It's because the belief that the end justifies the means.
Right.
And even if we can convince 30% of the people that this is the case because their ideology predisposes them to believe that this is the case, that's worth it. Even if it's like in the Soviet situation, they know that we're lying, we know that they're lying, we know that they know that, the whole
Yeah.
Solzhenitsyn quote. Okay, well, how can that exist in the real world if everybody knows it's a lie?
Yeah.
Well, it's because enough people will go along with it because they want to believe that the state is in control and that things aren't collapsing around them, or they want to believe that their side. So, like, for instance, today we've got two very polarized, we're gonna for Kenny G, woe betide us in history because we're running the same election that we ran 4 years ago over again that really nobody wants. Very few people
Yeah.
want, Trump versus Biden, but we're running that. And therefore, on whichever camp you're in, I don't want to say it too dramatically, but there's a certain amount of justification for, well, yeah, but the other side's so bad that we can excuse saying that the border's closed. We can excuse saying that, we have no crime problem in this country. We can excuse all of these things because the alternative is so much worse.
Yeah. Well, again, you and I have talked about this to the point where I'm a little fearful where I'm going to sound like a broken record anyway, that we're tying people's feeling of being righteous and good to this new, we call it a narrative nowadays, which
Right.
is, if you don't go along with this immigration thing, then you're a racist, you're a
Right.
bigot, you're whatever. And history will look upon those people disfavorably. So you better be on our team because, when they look back on the people who fight this, it's really going to look bad. And so they tie this to a bit of self-righteousness and being, more, um, evolved and more sophisticated and whatever. Also, we
Sure.
can't forget, the U.S. One of the major downfalls of our society is just NIMBYism. Like, as long as that's not affecting me, like, who cares, right?
Right.
But to your point, like, about the little white lies. So we have. I gave an example of Mayorkas, like that may be the biggest lie there is now. Although, I don't know, the January 6th quote unquote insurrection. I would put
Insurrection.
that up there. Like, I think that's a gargantuan. I think over time, 10 years from now, you and I are going to have a whole new bevy of facts that have come out. They're going to show that was maybe the biggest lie you and I were told over in a long time. I have nothing to back that up on except for my opinion. But going back to your white lie thing, just like parents and friends and siblings and families tell each other little white lies, we're also being fed just a constant drip of little white lies. I think I heard something a few weeks ago, something like the last 8 or 9 consecutive labor reports put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which like cites things like unemployment or whatever. And so they put out a report like every month or every 6 weeks or whatever. I don't know the frequency and I don't know all the details, but I pay a little bit of attention to that stuff, but I don't know all the details on that. But they put out a thing that says we had 300,000 new jobs created, and then they get to go around patting themselves on the back for 300,000 jobs created.
Right.
And then quietly the next month when the new report comes out, they revise down last month's.
Yes,
And that happened
exactly.
something like 8 or 9 times consecutive, or 8 times out of 9 or something like that. It was like $439,000 jobs in one period, whether it was a year or a quarter or a month or whatever, just kind of quietly got erased. That's an example. How we calculate things like inflation. Like, everyone knows, you go to the store now and a pound of chicken costs roughly, 50 or 70% more than it did in 2019, 5 years ago. Everyone knows this. but they put out these inflation reports that are completely recalculated. We don't calculate any way near the way we used to in 1983 because they changed the calculus, they changed the algorithm, they changed the methodology to make it look better than it does. And so it's just this constant being fed little white lies and huge lies.
And this is how I think one of the things that's happened and what makes people so cynical is the fact that people realize that, or people, I think people realize that folks have become in these elite positions have become so good at manipulating the truth. You can say, you can say tomorrow, Brian Harding killed 5 people on January 24th, and it's a massive headline. And tomorrow you retract it and say, "Oh, we were wrong. It was actually Brian Hemingway in Maldives did this." But it goes on page 13. But your reputation is destroyed forever because the retraction doesn't carry as much weight as the original statement. And those intentional manipulations like that can set the narrative for how people then perceive reality going forward, whether it's a politician, whether it's a media figure, whether it's somebody in business or an entertainer. Lots of entertainers' lives have been ruined because they might have liked a comment on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter or something, and then all the headlines come out, so-and-so is a virulent racist. Well, all they did was they liked something, and the next day they said, well, no, he just liked it. He didn't actually say anything, but his reputation is still ruined. So the manipulation of the truth and the manipulation of communicating truth has become so corrupted that these things become possible. That's where I think the real problem is.
And I shouldn't be smiling because it's not funny, but it's so freaking predictable. Just like, I don't know if you ever had this when you were a kid, Dave. I didn't have it much because my siblings are a lot older than me. Well, now that they're adults, I'll say they're way older than me, right? But imagine like you're the 7-year-old kid and your 10-year-old sibling gets you down on the ground on your back and pins you down, and they're doing the thing where they're tapping your chest real hard and they say, "Quit hitting yourself, quit hitting yourself, quit hitting yourself," right? And at some point, like, they're saying you're hitting yourself and you're not doing it. Or they're taking your hand and like hitting you in the head with your own hand. Like, I don't know if you had that kind of thing going on when you were a kid. And you just get so enraged. You're like, just lose your mind. You just like start swinging. Right. And I think that is what leads to the eruptions in the crises, like the shot on Fort Sumter and these major things is people get to a point they say, okay, I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and you're telling me things that are flat out lies. We all know you're lying, as Solzhenitsyn said. You know you're lying. I know you're lying. On and on and on, and you just won't stop. And it's just so aggravating. So, for example, with the border, we have people who's I imagine being a rancher in South Texas. Imagine being somebody who owns property in South Arizona.
Yeah, horrible.
And the government saying, everything's fine. And your whole livelihood, generations of your family, what your family has built is just being destroyed. And they're saying, shut up, the border's fine. I can see how that just gets to a point where people just lose their minds. They're like, okay, fine. We've tried the dialogue thing that hasn't worked. And I'm not condoning it. I'm not hoping for it, but I totally understand it.
And that's where in the past, so if you take a look at, this is a good time to go back to Nixon, right? And to Watergate. So, the Republicans had everything in the world to lose by Nixon, and they did, by Nixon being found guilty of what he was determined. I mean, not in a court of law, but not even in impeachment, but, based on all the evidence, we all believed he's guilty. And so, but at that time, the Republicans and society in general, I would say it would have happened the same way probably with the Democrats, had at least enough of a fidelity to the truth that they couldn't, without feeling intense shame, say, no, he didn't do anything wrong. Today, if that same situation happened, and somebody is accused of something, no, he couldn't have done anything wrong. Right. Or, we've had in our own time, a number of things that were said about whatever you think about Trump. We know now that all this stuff that they said about him, the dossier, the Steele dossier, and I don't want to mention some of the things that they said were just, it's complete garbage, complete absolute nonsense. But people were willing to buy it because it forwarded an agenda. The agenda has become the agenda in previous eras was not always, at least not always, more important than the truth. Today, the agenda is more important than the truth in almost every situation. So you can say whatever you want. If it forwards your agenda, enough of the public will go along with it and turn a blind eye to it. So you are actually entitled to your own set of facts if it forwards your own agenda.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that is like the most again, maddening, frustrating, whatever descriptors you want to use for me is how somebody decided, and it wasn't me for sure, that we no longer got to use the words true or false. We had to start speaking in terms of misinformation and disinformation. And there's a new one I can't wait to tell you about. And I go, wait a second. Why can't we just say true or false?
Right.
And the answer is obvious. Like why you can't say true or false, because nobody wants to admit to anything that's true or false, because if they are on the hook for saying something is true or false, that obliterates the agenda. And now we're back to, again, explaining to our kid that, Fluffy went to the farm instead of Fluffy got hit by the car. That goes away if the kid sees Fluffy with blood, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why the saying things like true or false is almost disallowed at this point. And my new favorite. So my understanding, if I remember this correctly, misinformation is intentionally saying something that is incorrect according to whomever decides these things. Now, again, it's not based on true or false. It's whoever the arbiter is of facts. If it goes against what they want, that's misinformation. Disinformation is doing it intentionally, or do I have that backwards? Maybe disinformation is doing it intentionally, misinformation is doing it accidentally. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, disinformation is intentional, misinformation is accidental.
Or my new favorite one, which I just heard for the first time about a week and a half ago, is malinformation. Have you heard of this one?
I've heard that used, but I haven't heard it used in context.
So malinformation is something that is factually correct, but makes the government look bad.
And you know what all of those are about? All of those are about conclusions. Yeah. All of those are about leading to a conclusion you don't want to have. So if you take a look at the fact checkers, so I look at a number of different news sites. One of them I look at is Google News, just because I want to get kind of a broad view of things. And because I want to they often use sources that I'm like, that's a pretty suspect source. So I just want to see what the other side's saying. And they'll have their fact checkers. They're very prominently up there. And there can be things that are, might go into this sort of malinformation category. There can be statements that are listed there and the fact checker says it lacks context. So this could be true. This could be factually accurate, but it lacks context. Now, what is the context that it lacks? It's the context that it lacks to lead you to the conclusion that they want you to draw. Right. So all the facts might line up the way you say they line up, but it doesn't lead you to the conclusion we want you to have. So therefore, it's either disinformation or maybe it's malinformation. It's all true, but it leads you to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been wondering, and maybe you can help me with this, like when we talk about the government lying, I think that one of the things that, and one of the things I would say right now that is hurting conversation is people just using generic terms. So I'll give you an example.
Yes, yeah.
When we talk about the government lying, I would imagine a fairly high percentage of people who say or hear that think politicians are lying.
Right.
But another entirely different group would say, no, I mean the bureaucrats are lying.
Yeah.
And then an entirely different group from those two would say they're all full of shit. They're all lying, right? But we don't ever take the time to clarify this. We act as if we're all on the same page, and there's no intentional pausing to just clarify. Are we all talking about the same thing here? Right? Which in my opinion would help a lot of this. So for example, when we talk about the government lying, like I picture if I were to go back in time, the government being the bureaucracies and our elected representatives are there to kind of keep the government, the bureaucrats, at bay. That's my kind of understanding.
Right.
I don't think that that's the way the majority of the population sees it today. I think the majority of the population sees that all the bureaucrats and politicians are all one big blob, and it's us against them kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Does that feel accurate to you, or is that too big of a leap?
Well, no, it does feel accurate to me, and certainly to the point of that fuzzy word, government. Of the government, like, or anytime you use a fuzzy word, you use it because, well, that's overgeneralization. Most of the time in media and government, when a fuzzy word is used, like the government is lying, or any other word that you kind of make so big and ambiguous that it could mean anything or it could mean nothing.
Yeah.
It's
Well, now things
oftentimes
like
done.
plagiarism fit in that category.
Well, absolutely, and it's done so that it has your meaning even if contradictory facts come up.
Yeah.
So I'll give you. I have a life rule, and this is anything that has any food that has a French name, I'm not going to eat because
Give me an
it's
example. What is a French name? Is quiche French?
escargot.
Oh,
Escargot. It's
okay, gotcha.
snails. It's snails. Or wait a minute, calamari. That's Italian, isn't it? Okay,
I don't know.
so
Yeah.
anyway, if it has a name, you have to give it a name that doesn't mean what it really is. Somebody's
Yeah.
lying to me, and they're lying because
Yeah.
it's not good. So this is one of Dave's life rules here. So, but the same thing is really true if you take a look at a lot of the words that we use. If we talk about, let's pick another hot topic of the day. Hot topic, climate change. We used to call it global warming.
Yeah.
But now it's called climate change. Anything that, and there's climate's changing. There's things that we're doing about it and things that we're involved. I'm not saying that, everything's hunky dory and we don't have any impact on it. I think we do. But when we say climate change, you can fit anything you want into that. And you can also say that, well, but here's the exception that, well, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Or any of these kinds of things, racism. Racism is such a nebulous word that if you can make it mean anything, it means nothing. And you're using it for an agenda to lead to a conclusion, a political power-based conclusion that you want it to mean. So, and the facts, even if facts come up that are contradictory to that, it doesn't lead you to a contradictory conclusion because you said, no, that's not what I meant.
Right.
It's deception.
Yeah. So one of the interesting parts for me is seeing how we just kind of, because there was this institutional trust, like, again, going back to Cronkite and Brokaw and things like that.
Yes.
There was this institutional trust that, like, if they said it, you take it to the bank.
Right.
And that's still somewhat ingrained in us. That has not been flushed completely out yet. And so we hear things and our intuition says, must be true. I heard it from a quote unquote credible source.
Right.
Therefore, it must be true. And we act as if. So that happens. But also simultaneously, different groups are more interested in being quote unquote on the right side of history, or being part of the righteous, sophisticated, educated, more evolved group, that they just blindly go along with things that they clearly see are incorrect. Right. That's happening as well. And so facts just become less of a thing. And specifically, the agreed upon definition of words, what you would call 20 years ago, we could have called a factual definition of the word plagiarism, for example. There would be no dispute about that. Right. You open the Webster's dictionary, it says what it says, and that's it. Well, now they've altered dictionaries, for example. The Merriam-Webster dictionary has been altered in the last few years on certain keywords and things like that, or Webster, one of those two. I don't know which one it is, but I remember seeing it and seeing the before and after and going, wait a second, they're literally changing words in the dictionary now,
right,
to allow them to fit, to get to the outcome they want, or the story they want, or the narrative they want.
The narrative.
And again, that the part where we can't trust the media, because they all, I mean, I don't know if any media source that doesn't have a bias. I don't mean like regular human bias. Like, I get we all have a bias.
Sure.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking like a significant political bend.
Right.
Like, I don't know even to this day, like how to even find things, and I don't have the energy or time or desire to go look a story up 3 different places and try to sift through and like figure it out. Like, so that's not going to happen, right?
Right.
And then just basic things the government won't be honest with us about.
Right.
And when I know about the government, I mean like the bureaucracies, like, again, immigration. What was unemployment last month? Like, there's a new trick with that one is they'll say 400,000 jobs were created, for example. And what they don't tell you is 300,000 were part-time jobs. So it's really 150,000 people got 2 part-time jobs instead of 400,000 people. But they just carry on as if, like, and again, it just doesn't matter. And I think this is one of the matches that are being carried to the haystack that if it does break bad, I think this is one of the things that will like send it up.
It is absolutely, because if you can't trust just basic reality that's being communicated to you, you have no, you have no society at that point. What we have at that point is we've got a narrative that trumps reality. The narrative determines who the trusted sources are, rather than the trusted sources helping to set the narrative based on the facts. The narrative determines which facts can be considered. So if the narrative is all encompassing, is all powerful, and facts that don't fit the narrative are no longer considered even facts, then you have competing narratives. Then, well, what we talked about this before. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, senator from New York, said you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Well, now everybody is entitled to the facts that they want that support their narrative. And this is the problem. And the problem you just mentioned about, who has the energy to go sort all this stuff out, right? There's on any subject, there is a ton of different facts on that subject. And we trust certain people to research this out and to go find that. We've lost trust. We've lost institutional trust in the media. We've lost institutional trust in our politicians. We've lost institutional trust in basically every large organization that used to be able to, or that we used to think they're going to, they've got their biases, but they're at least going to be an honest arbiter of the facts that they see, of the things that they see are happening around them, whether it was in the Watergate scenario, whether it was in Kennedy's assassination, whatever the scenario happens to be. And once you've lost that trust, and once narratives become all, then, how much better are we really in our sort of societal outlook than the Soviet Union or than North Korea, when the powerful can say, here's what you should believe, and anything that contradicts that, even if it's staring you in the face, like millions of people coming across the border, no, the border's secure. The narrative trumps all. That becomes a place where, that's a tinderbox ready to blow.
Yeah. So, for example, a video I saw earlier this week, which is a guy coming over across the border in Arizona, and he's being interviewed by, I think, just like a regular citizen. It was not like a news source or whatever. And this guy is like a Middle Eastern guy, very understandable English and pronunciation, things like that, but had an accent, like probably from Middle East. And the guy was kind of giving him a hard time. And this guy who came across the border said, "One day you will know my name." And it was not in a funny way. Like he's letting us know,
scary.
like, yeah, you don't know who I am now, and mock me if you will, but someday you will know who I am.
Yeah.
And so I think about that as the Secretary of Homeland Security or whatever Mayorkas is sitting there saying, no, the border's secure. We're doing meaningful operations, and he's using all these big fancy words to basically explain all these grand things that they're doing, and we all know they're full of shit. Well, the people who get negatively, like seriously hurt by this man who says someday you will know who I am, if he does go on to do something, and you and I've talked about this before, you don't need 5 million people to do significant damage. We learned that in Israel a few months ago. 500 people could do a catastrophic amount of damage in a country like this. If it continues this way, there's the mathematical likelihood that something bad does not happen becomes zero at some point.
It becomes infinitesimal.
It gets so out of whack that it becomes so. The people who've been lied to and have been told to go along with the narrative, well, one day they're going to suffer like meaningful consequences, and they're just going to say, "F it, and somebody's going to pay." And that's where revolutions happen.
Exactly right, and that's what's happened. It's sort of like I'm reminded of Marie Antoinette, right? Well, the peasants they're suffering, they're starving. Well, give them cake. Let them have cake. No problem.
Let them have a half an hour of nice, and then we'll get them back to work.
Exactly right. Eventually they bring out the guillotines and bad stuff happens. Now, we hope that we can avoid that here, but if if there is such a connection to narrative that narrative trumps all, then and facts are no longer possible to contradict the narrative. Honest people, you and I want to know when my narrative is not correct. I really do. Yeah. I mean, in this podcast, one of the principles you and I started this podcast on was, hey, if you disagree with us, visit our Rumble channel, visit our social channels, tell us where we're wrong, because we want to know. We want to be connected with the truth. And I have to believe, Brian, that the majority of people in this country, they really want to be connected with the truth. Now, there are fringes in all, not just both sides, there's fringes all over the place that want to only believe the narrative regardless of any facts. There's the Kool-Aid drinkers, if you will, that only want to believe whatever their narrative is because it's their whole world. Yeah. But I don't believe that the majority of people are like that. I believe that the majority of people want to be truly connected and want to know if something really isn't true. They don't want to believe something that's not true, because I think that's sort of inherent in human nature, is to want to be, in concert with how things really are. And when that becomes so obvious that it's so impossible to ignore that the narrative we're being fed is wrong and people are dying because of it. And I mean, people are dying because of it right now. I mean, fentanyl overdoses. I mean, we just take the one that we're talking about right now with the border crisis that we have in the U.S. currently. People are dying of fentanyl in record numbers, and trafficking and all of these different things. Eventually that reaches a tipping point, and that is the tinderbox moment when people say, enough, no more, we're taking action now. And, we're not calling for revolution here. I don't want anything like that.
No, but I would much prefer that Mayorkas just take the stand and say, you know what, we've done this, we've opened it on purpose for XYZ reason, and we're going to close it tomorrow. And he closes it. Like, that would be much better. Or at least come out and say, no, we're going to leave it open. We think we need a mass surge of migration to keep the society going, because we don't have enough
more workers, whatever
reproduction. Yeah. We don't have the sustainable reproduction rate.
We don't have a replacement rate in reproduction.
Okay, like just be straight with us. Now, again, that being said, if politicians and bureaucrats were straight with us, they wouldn't get elected, because we wouldn't like what they say. And so ultimately we kind of are the root cause of this, because we want people to go and do things we want without the negative ugliness of it. Like, the kids in cages, like that stuff comes up. Like, you show a picture of that, and like the whole like objective plan you're trying to do with immigration goes out the window because we see a sympathetic video. And I mean that literally, not sarcastically.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So again, I realize that there's limits here, but I think that by and large, we all have kind of a subconscious idea of like, okay, whether it's the 80-20 rule or something similar, like subconsciously, okay, we're not going to agree on everything. I get that. But more or less, these people have my best interests at heart.
Yeah.
And when they may stretch the truth here and there. Of course, politicians are going to do this. Of course, the government's going to blah, blah, blah. But more or less, these people have my best interests at heart. Well, I think the tipping point you're talking about that I am looking at is when that calculation has been disproven, and they're like, wait a second, these people are actively not just working against me, but sacrificing me for another group or another cause or whatever. And I've done nothing wrong. Power. I just or just greed or power or whatever. I just want to take care of my family. Like last week, you were talking about negative rights. The people who just want to be left alone and have the freedom to live the life the way that they want, that doesn't negatively impact anyone else. Once those people have that stripped away from them, then what do they have to lose? And like looking at the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution, like the reason people got to those points, I'm guessing, not having lived in those times, is they had nothing else to lose. If you don't have facts to agree upon, if you don't have language to agree upon, if you don't have a fair understanding of what is fair for money, for example, or what's fair in land ownership or things like that, well, your life is going to be so miserable that dying is a lateral move. And when that's the case, like, bad things can happen.
Well, and you see, that's where when you have the luxury of making your decisions emotionally based on what you see in videos and on TV and what you hear people saying that sound good, sound sympathetic, sound yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Mayorkas, he's a good speaker. Obama, he's a good speaker. Trump, he's a good. Well, I maybe won't go there, but
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
whoever is a good speaker, and you identify with what they're saying. When that becomes, hey, but I'm hungry. Yeah, but I'm hungry, or
Yeah.
my kids, doesn't have heat, or
Yeah.
I think there's an invasion coming. That's, when it comes down to facts, we've talked about this before. When facts ultimately reveal themselves in such a way that you are threatened in your person, in your family, in your very existence, then the emotions of survival are going to overcome the emotions of what you see in the media and what you see in the fancy speeches that powerful people
Right.
make, and then you will make a different choice. That's when it comes down to, you would hope that it doesn't have to come to that level of survival. But that's kind of what, in the theory that we've been operating under for our entire podcast, this 80-year sort of ish cycle of ending up in a crisis scenario where all the rest of this fluff gets stripped away and we concentrate only on the survival of our nation and our family and ourselves. That's seems to be necessary to make progress.
Well, it seems to me like it's necessary because we had, like, last couple weeks we've been talking about, like, we have the luxury, and you had another word for it, where we have the ability to kind of not have to worry about these
Right.
real, like, detrimental risks and things like that. Like, we have
Yes.
the luxury, the freedom to worry about things like, are we gonna buy a gas car, electric car,
Right.
versus
Exactly.
how am I gonna feed my family next week? Like,
Right.
we had
Right.
the luxury of having these other concerns, and that stretches and stretches and stretches, and then boom, it snaps. We have to snap back to reality because
Yeah.
everything becomes so broken, so corrupted, so dysfunctional that it comes down like a house of cards.
Yep.
And now we have to really, we don't have the luxury anymore of taking for granted what people say, because your family might not eat if you take it for granted and you're
Right.
wrong, for example.
Right.
So real quick, I want to move into two things that I think are fairly significant. One is way more meaningful and kind of going along the fourth turning that you were talking about, and then one is a little more fun, and maybe we'll end the show with something fun for a change.
Oh yeah.
That uh, so it's not so dire, but one of the things that you and I have talked about, both on and off the podcast, is, when in these crisis eras, like, lots of things are on the table that we wouldn't have imagined being on the table 15 years ago.
Sure.
I cannot imagine in the 90s, in my early 20s, thinking that in any sort of reality I lived in, a state would secede from the Union.
Right.
But
Yes.
I think, these things are become, like, lots of things are on the table in these crisis areas that are
That's
not on
right.
the table in a more peaceful environment.
That's right.
And we're beginning to see this in Texas, where
Yeah.
the state of Texas has had enough of this immigration stuff. The federal government will
Yep.
not back down on letting these people come over and just wreak havoc on their cities, on
Right.
the countryside, the farms, like, you name it. And
Yep.
it's not just dollars; it's people getting harmed. It's people just losing luxuries they paid for, like letting their
Yep.
kids walk to school. you
Right.
know,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
it's all across the board. Kind of, these things are being lost. And while the government, the federal government, is saying, "Oh no, the border's fine and secure," Texas has had enough.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm sure you and I will be paying a lot of attention to. But I could totally see this being something that 70 years ago, the things you and I have seen in the last 10 days, will be known as a spark, if there is a succession of states or a state. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Texas was its own country at one time. There's nothing
Yeah.
that
It
says it
was. Yeah.
wouldn't be that again.
That's right.
And a pretty significant GDP it's got. It could
Yep.
afford it. There's a couple of states that could afford it. It's one of them. Um, I think that that's something to really to be paying attention to. And you and I are watching this unfold in real time. And again, like we've talked before, because we can't agree upon what a fact is, that drives it. But I got to tell you, Dave, I'm shocked at how little conversation there is about this. Are you?
I am. I mean, I was thinking the exact same. You know, you and I haven't actually talked about this
No.
particular thing, but as I've been watching this unfold the last few days, the Supreme Court, they're basically siding with the feds and saying, no, you can't do this, Texas. And then, I mean, we see an escalation. We see Ron DeSantis and other Southern governors. And other red state governors saying, no, we think Texas has got it right. And I find myself wondering, is this a spark that could reignite a literal separation in the country, a literal dissolution between red and blue? I don't think it would be necessarily just geographic, but it could very well
much more difficult geographically now than it was in 1860 for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have a certain number, and there's a significant number of states that say, yeah, Texas has got it right. And, how far would they be willing to push that? They do have, if you combine Texas, Florida, a number of, there's some smaller states. I don't want to speculate that could happen again, but I found myself thinking just recently that could very well happen. Because I mean, if what would the spark be? All of these things, when this has happened in the past, the Fort Sumter or the Boston Tea, there's a whole variety of small events trigger big events. The World War I, how it started, Archduke Ferdinand, all these different things in history. And before those little events, nobody expected them. Nobody expected something. I mean, there was talk, there was preparation. Lincoln was and the South, but there wasn't. They weren't just. It didn't build up at a steady crescendo. It built up and then it exploded as a powder keg.
Right. Yeah.
Could that happen now? It could. I mean, I'd never thought I would say that, but it could.
Well, again, you and I have not talked about this in particular, but you and I have talked many months ago about, theoretically things like state seceding would happen at a time like this if we don't get our stuff together and start having actual legitimate efforts to reunite. If we're gonna keep polarizing each other, what other alternative could there be? And going back to your stories of Macedonia and Greece and things like that, they used to all be one country there, and now they're not, and that's how these things happen, right? Looking at this in particular, again, the Supreme Court, I'm not an attorney. The Supreme Court thing, I've heard that it's no big deal. It's just an injunction. The Fifth Circuit hasn't actually ruled in the case.
It up again,
So it maybe not that, it's not as drastic as the Supreme Court saying the federal government has no obligation to do it.
Right.
And other people are saying, no, they've made it clear here that this is the path they're going to take. I don't understand that stuff. What I am shocked about, though, is this is not water cooler conversation. And that blows me away.
Yeah. No, you're right. Because I would have thought that, especially at the moment that Texas said, yeah, we heard that. We don't care. We're not going to go along with that. It would seem to me that would be like on the front page of every newspaper, that there would be, let's convene an emergency session of Congress to have a discussion about
market
this.
Dropping by 5%,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're all concerned about Tesla's profits and but we're not concerned about, a literal constitutional crisis that is unfolding before our eyes. And at some point, the discussion, I'm all about the technical. I love to sort out technicalities and think about those things. But at some point, it really doesn't matter as much if the people are saying, well, it's going back to the Fifth Circuit Court, and I understand those technicalities. But at some point, what really matters is what the bulk of people believe.
Right.
And if the bulk of people believe that there is an overarching, the federal government is not going to protect us, and you probably read Greg Abbott's letter that described this, and he invoked several pieces of the Constitution and said, look, you have failed in your obligation, and therefore we are going to do this. That's constitutional crisis territory at that point. If you're not going to protect our borders, we're going to do this.
And in their defense, this is on the heels of 3 years of asking them in congressional hearings, like you and I talked about half an hour ago with Mayorkas. Why won't you close the border? Him saying it's secure. What are you talking about? Everything's fine.
Exactly.
But he and his ilk are not suffering the consequences of this. And the people in Texas are. Right. And like you and I have been talking about for the last 28 episodes, people will hit a point where they just say, I don't care anymore. I'm going to do it. I have to protect myself. You're not going to do it, and I'm going to do what I got to do. And I don't understand. Again, I'm not hoping that this is a big deal.
No.
It's an election year. It's likely Biden will just fold and make it quietly go away, because I can't imagine a situation where he's going to go down there and, with troops against the Texas National Guard or something like that in an election year and like force them to keep migrants. That would just be horrible optically for sure. Right. I can't imagine that would be the case, but nonetheless, it is a symptom of the types of things that we are in the midst of.
Right.
And again, always kind of thinking back, like, what was it like in Germany in 1941?
Right.
This is kind of like probably what it was like, where people are just like, yeah, it's a big deal, but they'll work it out. Again, like my common kind of thought is we just have had the luxury of people just always kind of figuring it out.
Well,
and that'll work until it doesn't.
and the danger is that in most throughout the last 80-ish years, that's worked. Usually that attitude works. Usually we can say, I don't agree with Carter. I mean, I thought he was horrible. But this will all work itself out. Yeah. Or maybe the Democrats said, I don't like Reagan. He's a warm. But there comes a time when the societal, mood is such that a just a small spark that would normally have just fizzled out explodes in a way that none of us have ever seen before. And I think that's part of the problem.
Also, the difference is, again, I keep going back to values. When we have shared values, the conflicts are much less significant.
Yes,
when we don't have shared values, and you have the federal government with their set of values trying to force a state with a different set of values to comply, that's a different conflict on a scale that we've not seen in our lifetime in our country.
Yeah, so, that's right.
Yeah, we'll keep tabs on that. The other thing I thought was kind of interesting.
Give me something fun, Brian. You said you promised something fun. I'm depressed
kind
now.
Of will segue from not paying attention to facts, but also lead into something that I'm genuinely sad Kenny G will not get to experience. So, as you may have heard, Sports Illustrated laid off or is going to lay off their entire staff between now and March, whatever it is, and it's January 2024 as you and I are recording this. And in large part because they ignored the facts. They had a customer base who enjoyed certain topics, certain imagery, like the swimsuit model or swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated when I was in my teens was, I mean, you look forward to that for 90 days at least, and I mean,
exactly.
I will say I looked forward to that for 90 days at least.
Well, and red-blooded male.
You
bet, of course.
Yeah, I mean, but so they started putting they put a fairly overweight woman on there and replaced the Elle McPhersons of the world and the Kate Uptons and the supermodels with these other folks, and then they were trying to force this to work with an audience that obviously now in hindsight didn't want it, and so they ignored the facts as you and I have been talking about, and they went along with their narrative that you should want this. And in business, that doesn't work as well as it does in government, when you can force people. In business, like if your clients go buy from brand X instead, you go out of business. So they're laying off their entire staff. And the crescendo, if I heard it right, was they had a trans woman on the cover last year, and that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. So thinking back in my childhood, again, not that I had a collection of Sports Illustrated swimsuit editions, but it was the one time a year I bought Sports Illustrated.
Not a complete collection. You didn't have a complete collection.
I may have had 37 or 38 of them, but I was missing a handful for sure. and the 37 or 38 may have had a couple pages missing, but we won't get into that either, right? My point is, this is something I'm not making this up. I sincerely, genuinely am sad for Kenny G that he will not get to experience that kind of thing, because already, and again, not that Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue was porn. It was not.
Right.
But the abundance of porn available now online, free and whatever, it's just a different world.
Yeah.
And having a chance to be in an innocent time and have that one, I wouldn't even say it was risque. There was sometimes they would do the painted on swimsuits instead of actual clothing swimsuits. That was a little more risque, but it was still fairly harmless. It was not, it was something that was enjoyed. It was something that people look forward to. And it seems like that kind of thing is just gone forever because
It
of
is.
the infiltration of the internet of porn and all that kind of stuff. But also like physically touching a magazine and reading about the World Series or the Super Bowl, or
Sure.
actually touching that versus just like scrolling through your phone and seeing sound bites and little one-liners and things like
Right.
that. A completely different experience. And I'm legitimately sad that Kenny G and Jenny G will never get to experience that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along those same lines, as you know, I take care of my 95-year-old dad, and he ends up watching a lot of shows from the 70s, 80s, 60s. And so I end up periodically watching those shows with him at night. And one of the things that I, along the lines of it's a sad that Kenny G will not experience, or maybe it'll make a comeback. I don't know. Maybe the Amish will rule the world in the next go around. I don't know. We'll see.
Right.
But the idea of having entertainment that is so wholesome that you kind of believe that the evil in the world, for you suspend disbelief of the evil in the world. Our shows today, our entertainment today, I mean, yeah, there was the Barbie movie this year, I suppose. I didn't see it, so I don't know what was really in it. I just
But
know
of course you saw it. Knock it off.
there's
Of
a lot of,
course you saw that.
all I know is there's a lot of pink in it. That's Ryan Gosling and pink, and there's a controversy about it, but that's all I know. But having a world that kids could grow up in, that your entertainment presents a problem. It's not a great problem. There's no evil. There's no death. There's no sex. And by the time half an hour rolls around, it's resolved again, provided for an innocence of children that I don't know is ever going to come back again. And that is something that I'm truly sad about. I'm truly sad that they can't experience MacGyver or The Love Boat or Fantasy Island.
Yeah. Okay, this is gonna. I wouldn't ordinarily talk about this, but you've opened a door here.
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna tell you something you that may surprise you, may not. Last weekend, my wife and I, again, this is January 2024, as you and I are recording this. I'm not making this up, I promise you. Last weekend, my wife and I together sat down and watched 3 episodes of Perry Mason that were black and white.
Beautiful.
And the weekend before that, we watched like 3 episodes of Matlock.
And is this a thing with you guys? Is this a commitment you made?
It's not a commitment, but I'll tell you what happened a couple of years ago. Actually, during the COVID stuff, honestly, this is kind of when it started. We got so tired of the modern quote unquote entertainment, and we just got burned out watching the news. That we started watching shows like Magnum PI from 1984, and we started watching shows like Hardcastle and McCormick.
Oh yeah,
and we got rid of our cable a few months ago. But up until then, we were DVRing every episode of Love Boat and Fantasy Island. We're DVR'd, and we didn't watch them all, but we watched them once in a while.
You bet, absolutely.
My wife likes watching the Golden Girls, so we rewatched the entire series of Cheers. Which went from the 80s and 90s. So I wouldn't say it was like a pact we made, but we just got burned out on modern quote unquote entertainment, and we just kind of enjoy that more. I don't know if wholesome is the word I would use, but a view of the world where you can again, maybe it's artificial and we're suspending reality for a moment,
right?
But enjoying a view of the world where evil is the minority, not the majority. I guess that's maybe.
I would say, Brian, it's also not necessarily explicit. Something that I happened to watch the other day when I put my dad to bed at night is the old Johnny Carson show came on.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson, I think he was interviewing Dana Carvey or somebody, Ed McMahon was there. And Johnny Carson, he would have his subtle, sort of innuendo risque moments, things he would say,
100%.
but it was all in the imagination. There was nothing explicit about it. It wasn't anything like you would see on late night today. And there was something about that it didn't necessarily deny reality, but it put it at the fringes. It wasn't straight in front of you. It put it at the fringes of your perception, so you could laugh at it, you could have fun with it, but you didn't have to necessarily confront it head on. And I think
you just hit something that we talked about a couple weeks ago that I didn't really connect it until you just said this. Now, Perry Mason's not a good example, but Matlock would be a good example. Cheers for sure.
Yeah.
The Love Boat. People would laugh at themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
People were okay. In fact, almost invited being the butt of the joke sometimes,
Absolutely,
which is
yes.
you don't see that anymore. All right, you and I, we're running long here.
Yep.
First of all, congratulations, Dave, on making through an episode with the flu. I appreciate you coming through, even though you don't feel well. You were way more talkative than I expected. I expected a lot of and ahas, but you filled half the time, even though you're sick. So good job on that. For those of you listening, go check out our Rumble channel, unsilentpodcast.com. Like Dave said, we do want to hear, like, if you think you guys are completely full of it, how you guys are describing this to Kenny G, who's a middle-aged person in the year 2090 is completely wrong. Tell us. I'd love to hear your perspective. And we want to explain what this moment in time is like. Dave and I think that we're going to go through some noteworthy periods of time ahead of us. However it unfolds, we have no idea, of course. But we want to just explain what this moment in time is like as we're going through it. And that's what we're trying to do for somebody who lives around 70 years from now. And so with that, we'll wrap up for this week. Thanks again, Dave. Thanks to everyone for tuning in.
See you next week.
And that's it for this week. And we'll talk to y'all next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.